Hey guys, this video it's about plant structure and the transport system in plants. So how plants look, what the structures are, what their functions are, and also how nutrients are moved around the plant as well as water. Okay, so here's the structure of a plant. You can see that there's a root system, which includes everything that's below ground, and then the shoot system, that's everything above the ground. So that's everything above, everything below, and we'll get into more detail on that later on. Okay. Now roots, they have a few functions, and one of the main ones is to anchor the plant so that it can stay where it's at, so that the wind cannot just blow over the plant and the plant comes out of the soil. Okay, so it anchors the plant, it absorbs nutrients and water for the plant. Okay, and it stores glucose as in the form of starch. That's why sweet potatoes are sweet and carrots are sweet as well, because all the glucose that the plants make, they actually transport it down to the roots, which are the carrots and the sweet potatoes, and they store it in there, right? So all that glucose is actually stored as starch. Okay, roots have some structures, and one of those structures is root hairs. Okay, now root hairs, what they do is they maximize the absorption of water, and you can see a lot of those root hairs here. You guys will have a chance to look at them under the microscope in the lab, but you can see those are root hairs. You can see some root hairs in these roots as well. Okay, they also have a root tip, which is this thing right here, and if we cut that off, okay, then the root will not be able to grow no more, because that's where the apical meristem is located. That's the main, the primary growth area for the cell. Okay, they also have vascular tissue or bundles, and we'll talk more about that. And those bundles and that tissue, just like in your body, your arteries and your veins transport blood, right? Well, those tissues or bundles transport the water and nutrients inside of a plant. Okay, so that's very important. But they're located in the roots as well, all throughout the plant, but they are located in the roots, since they gotta transport the water that's absorbed through the roots. Okay, now there's two types of roots. There are fibrous roots and tap roots. Fibrous roots are just, the examples are grasses, right? And they prevent erosion, so they spread. And I'll show you another picture of fibrous root. And then tap roots is just one main root going straight down, right? They're very good anchors, and they can reach underground water, even if it's really deep, right? These are the examples, and you can see one tap root is just one main root. The other one spreads out, and it prevents erosion. That's why it's we plant grass in front of our houses, so that we don't lose a lot of the soil that's there, right? So tap roots and fibrous roots. Now the other part of the plant, okay, we already talked about parts underground. Now we're going to talk about parts above ground. The stem is very important for a plant, because it supports the branches, which also support the flowers. Okay, and what's something important about stems is that they also expand to store food and water. Okay, in cactus, okay, you see some cactus that they expand. That's one of the reasons that they can survive in the desert very well, is because when it rains, they absorb all that water, their stems expand, and they're able to survive because they have those nutrients in the water inside of them. But again, the main function of the stem is to support the plant, support those branches that hold everything for the plant. Now there's also vascular tissue running through the stem, and that vascular tissue, those vascular bundles, are responsible for transporting all the nutrients and water throughout the plant. Okay, and we'll talk about more about the vascular tissue later on, but that's its function, to transport nutrient and water wherever it needs to go. Okay, now the stem also has stem hairs, just like the root hairs, or the root has hair, so the stem has hair, but this hair is actually responsible for protecting the plant. It protects the plant from predators and herbivores, or anything that's trying to attack the plant or eat the plant. It protects it. Sometimes it also it releases toxins, so that the animals that are biting it or trying to eat, they get sick. Stem hair also protects the stem from the weather, so it's there to keep it warm or keep it cool, whatever environment the plant is in. Okay. Leaves, on the other hand, their primary function is to photosynthesize, or to make glucose for the plant. That's their main purpose, their function, right? They're green because they have chlorophyll, chloroplast, which photosynthesizes and changes carbon dioxide, water, with the help of the sunlight, into oxygen and glucose for the plant. The structures of the leaf include the cuticle, which we'll talk about in more detail, the stomata, guard cells, and the chloroplast, which we already mentioned, as the organelle responsible for photosynthesis, which makes glucose for the plant. And where the animal that eats the plant gets that glucose and then turn it into ATP through cellular respiration. And these are processes that we already talked about earlier. Okay. Now leaves. The first part that we'll talk about leaves is the cuticle. The cuticle is just wax. It's a waxy covering that covers the leaves, also the stems, right? And the reason is because it's going to prevent water loss. These are one of the adaptations that plants had to develop in order to move from water near the water to areas where there was not a lot of water, right? So they could have this waxy covering around the leaves and stem, and they could absorb water through the roots and then prevent that water from escaping through their leaves and stems because of this cuticle that it keeps the water in. Okay. Another adaptation that leaves have is stomata. Okay, the stomata are just openings on the underside of the leaf, and that's where the oxygen and the carbon dioxide are exchanged. Okay, the stomata are closed and opened by cells that are called guard cells, and you'll have a chance to look at this under the microscope in one of the labs that we'll do in class. But you can see it here. This is the stomata, and then you can see the guard cells on the side of that opening. Okay. So again, this opening right here is the stomata right there. These two are called the guard cells, and that's because they're responsible for opening and closing the stomata. Okay, and the stomata is just there to exchange gases, release as well to release some of the water, which evaporates because of the heat. And most of the stomata are going to be on the underside. Some might be on the top of the leaf, but most of them are going to be on the underside. Okay, this is an example of a plant cell. Okay, we already talked about this. We looked at these under the microscope. But just to go over the structures, you can see that that's the nucleus. And then all these little green circles here, or little dots, those are the chloroplasts. And then you can also see the cell wall there, which is made out of cellulose. Remember that. Okay, we'll talk more about flowers later on, but for now we just need to know that flowers are the reproductive part of a flower. This is where all the reproduction takes place, right? There's a male part and female parts. Okay, some plants have both. Some plants have only one set of reproductive organs, and we'll talk about that later. But for now, we just need to know that flowers are the main reproductive part of a plant. Okay. Now, so just to review, we talked about the root system, and we said that was to absorb nutrients to anchor the plant in place, right? We also talked about the apical meristem, which is the main, where the growth happens in the roots and the stems as well, right? We talked about the shoot system, which includes the stem, the leaves, and the flowers. We said the stem can also have stem hairs, which protects the plant from weather and herbivores, and he holds the branches that hold the leaves, which photosynthesize for the plant, right, and make the glucose so that the plant can produce those beautiful flowers, and pollen so that it can actually reproduce, which is what we said about flowers. That's the main reproductive part of the flower. Now, the leaves make all the glucose through photosynthesis, but they gotta distribute that glucose somehow, and that's where the vascular system comes in. And these two tissues come into play for this: the distribution of water and the distribution of glucose. Okay, phloem and xylem. So again, you can see it here. It's being labeled as phloem, but phloem is just the tissue that transports glucose from the leaves, where it's made through photosynthesis, to wherever is needed in the plant. So it goes up and down and sideways, wherever it needs to go. That's where phloem is going to take the glucose. Okay. The other tissue is xylem. Xylem carries water, and it carries water from the roots to the rest of the plant. Okay. Now, water and nutrients. So it grabs the water, carries them up the plant, and it distributes it to wherever it needs to go. Mainly the leaves, since that's where photosynthesis happens, and you know that we need H2O and CO2 to make what the plant needs, or for the plant to make what it needs. Okay. Here's a quick chart that compares both. Xylem again carries water and minerals from the roots to the leaves, and we need to remember that this xylem cells are non-living. Okay, that's why they're hollow, and it just looks like a hollow tube going up the plant. Okay, and the direction of the water and minerals are always going up because it's from the roots to the leaves. Now phloem, in the other hand, it moves glucose from the leaves to wherever it needs to go. It is a living cell, okay, and the movement is up, down, and in any direction, really, wherever is needed, okay. So that covers the parts or the structures of the plant, okay, the roots, the stems, the leaves, the flowers, which we'll talk about in more detail in another video, and the vascular tissue, which is responsible for moving everything inside of the plant. Now, plants had to adapt, okay, to the environment that they live in today. We mentioned this earlier, but there's three adaptations, main adaptations that they have to develop in order to survive and to live in the environments that they live in today. First one was the absorption of nutrients, right? Early plants lived very close to the water, so as they started moving away from water sources, okay, they needed to develop, or something needed to happen in order for them to stay alive and be able to absorb nutrients and water, right? Also, once they got the water inside of their stems, leaves, and roots, they had to find a way to not lose it, okay? And the last one is, how do they reproduce on land? Because when plants were very close to the water, they would just release their pollen into the water, and hopefully that water will reach another plant, and the plant will reproduce. But now they're away from water sources. As they move away from it, well, they had to develop different structures and have different adaptations in order to survive. So the first one, when it comes to the absorption of water, they develop something called mycorrhizae, and what that is a relationship between fungus and the roots that help plants absorb more water. Okay, they also develop root hairs, and they develop roots, which is the main adaptation, right? So roots allow them to survive farther away from the water, because now they can actually anchor themselves and absorb nutrients from the soil if the root can go deep enough for it spread over a long area. And if it rains there, it's able to absorb those nutrients. Okay, now the way they prevented water loss is by this adaptation called the cuticle and the stomata, right? The cuticle is the waxy covering that we mentioned earlier that covers the leaves and stems that keeps all the water that was absorbed by the roots inside the plant. And the stomata is responsible for exchanging that oxygen and the carbon dioxide with the environment. Okay, but it's also responsible for keeping the water inside by getting those guard cells to close the stomata whenever it's too hot, or during the day when the sun is beating down on the plant. So that's how they prevented water loss. Now, reproduction of land, well, that's where flowers came into play, pollen came into play. Okay, so they developed pollen, or the appearance of pollen showed up, and now plants can actually, pollinators land on the flowers. They get some of the nectar, and this pollen attaches to their butts, and then they go land on another flower, and they can reproduce. So the way they evolved, or they adapted to this, was by having these beautiful flowers that attract pollinators, that allows them to reproduce, or use this organisms, right, as carriers of their pollen, so that they can go land in another plant and actually fertilize the plant. Okay? Alright, well, that was plant structures and adaptations. If you have any questions, please let me know.